Good evening and thank you for joining us. Blake Holland has the night off. Jurors who convicted a serial killer are now being harassed by that man's legal counsel. That's what a hearing centered on today in a Smith County courtroom. William Davis was convicted of killing multiple patients during his time as a nurse at the Christus Trinity Mother Frances Owen Hart Hospital. He was found guilty of intentionally injecting air into their arterial lines and was sentenced to death in October of 2021. The court returned in the case today for a simple status hearing as part of Davis's appeal process. But that hearing resulted in an order limiting the defense's contact with jurors. KLTV 7's Lauren Tier has more.
According to Judge Austin Reeve Jackson, the court has been receiving complaints from jurors who say they are being harassed by representatives of William Davis's new defense team. Jackson made it clear that this is a violation of the jurors' rights.
The court wants to make clear before going any further that, of course, the defense has the right to reach out and try to talk to these jurors, but that right is not absolute. It has to be done in accordance with the law, and it sounds like that's not what's happening here.
According to Jackson, family members of jurors have been approached even at late hours at their homes and workplace, with one elderly family member being approached at an assisted living facility. Jackson said the alleged defense representatives are not taking no for an answer.
It's the type of conduct that this court is not going to tolerate. We have a hard enough time getting people to show up to serve on jury duty.
The state's motion alleges some contacted jurors claiming to be New York law students from Cornell University, also asking what jurors discussed in the deliberation room. Despite the defense denying the allegations, a motion was filed by the state to order the harassment to cease. Jackson filed the order today.
No member of the defense team shall make any further attempt to contact any member of the jury without first seeking and being granted permission from the court to do so.
After the order, the state withdrew the motion for, quote, ease and simplicity, and the orders stand. Lauren Tier, KLTV 7 News.
Now, the defense team that the accusations were against is actually in charge of examining convictions. Jackson said anyone found to be in violation of today's order will face 180 days in jail.